Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Jena McGregor, Managing Editor at Charter, the future of work, media, events, and research company. I'm excited to be moderating the discussion we're going to have today. Here's the tension we're going to jump in for the next hour. Every company is investing heavily in AI tools, in AI workflows, in AI fluency. But what we're hearing more and more from CHROs, from learning and development leaders, even from CEOs, is that the tools aren't the constraint, the leadership is. Managers and senior leaders are being asked to translate AI capability into business outcomes, often without a clear playbook, not only for how to develop their own AI skills, but how to respond to this leadership challenge. I am excited to welcome three leaders who are here with us today who can help us define that playbook. Jamie Albers is co-founder and co-CEO of Mento, the leadership coaching platform that works with managers at companies like Anthropic, Dropbox, and Brex. Mento connects operators with leaders for one-on-one coaching and mentorship, and she co-founded Mento after her own experience as a leader at Google's Jigsaw. Heather Stefanski is Chief Learning and Development Officer at McKinsey, where she leads learning and development for more than 40,000 colleagues across more than 65 countries at a firm that is itself rapidly reshaping how it develops its own people in the AI era. And Adam Yamaguchi leads executive leadership development at DoorDash, which is also rebuilding parts of how it hires and develops leaders around AI. For those who aren't familiar with Charter, again, my name is Jena McGregor. I help lead our editorial team here at Charter, which focuses on bridging research to practice and delivering smart, evidence-based, practical ideas for managing better to leaders of the talent agenda. AI in work and AI in leadership are core areas of our coverage and our focus. And so this is, a conversation that we're really excited to have today. A small note of housekeeping, please jump into the chat or the Q&A function throughout the course of the conversation. Share your questions for our panelists. Tell us what's on your mind and what you want to hear. We will, at times during the conversation, jump into those questions, and some of them we'll answer toward the end. We'll probably speak for about 40 or 45 minutes and then jump into those questions. So hopefully you'll have lots of great questions and we'll have a chance to answer them in the end. I'd love to jump right in. Jamie, I want to go to you first. Mentos coaches work with a range of companies across, all kinds of industries every day. You have a cross-company view of what leaders are actually grappling with on the ground right now. Can you just help us set the scene? What are the biggest challenges that are coming up again and again in the conversations that you're having with managers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we survey before members start coaching, before leaders start coaching, we survey them and ask them a bunch of questions about what they're looking to get out of coaching. And so, even in the past month, where we've had about several hundred responses, the things that we see are no one's asking, I need help learning how to use ChatGPT or Claude. It's a much more nuanced a challenge right now, and it really breaks down into three core pain points. First, there's the personal anxiety. Managers are being asked to lead a transformation they haven't finished navigating themselves, and they have a lot of concern not only for their own skills and development, but also for that of their team. Managers feel responsible for the growth and the development and ushering their team members into this new era. So there's a lot of responsibility and anxiety around that. The second is really around the nature of collaboration. The surface area that managers need to navigate in order to get things done is changing dramatically across organizations. So, the old question was, how do I get my team to work well together? How do we work well with these cross-functional partners? Now it's, how do I help my team work with technology that is constantly changing while also collaborating across functions and leadership levels that are rapidly changing and also blurring. And then another one that's, obvious, but is really, we see a lot in people's responses is just this urgency and this tremendous pressure when everything also feels possible. Anyone can create ideas, prototypes. The scarce resource isn't output, it's judgment about what's actually worth pursuing. And leaders feel a lot of responsibility to set that and define that for their team. So, those are sort of traditional leadership skills, but when you look on the ground, what's actually different is that we're in a world where there is no stable operating environment. And, managers are leading in motion, they're
Yep.
setting direction, knowing it changes. And so what we're seeing, kind of beneath all of this is that it's not just sort of the AI capability, it's the manager capacity within an AI environment that people are is really top of mind for leaders as they're coming into coaching.
So heightened personal anxiety, heightened sense of responsibility, heightened urgency. I'm going to guess some of that sounds familiar to you, Heather. How would you how would you characterize? I mean, I think you also have kind of a unique perch in that you're seeing what McKinsey's own employees and partners are dealing with, but also you hear from many of your clients about some of the big challenges that they're facing. So how would you put that into context of what you're hearing?
Well, it's very relevant, and we've observed other data points to support it, right? So we know
Mhm.
that like about 70% of AI transformations in general, and also AI transformations fail because of human factors, right?
Mhm.
The human factors are an incredibly important part of it. We also know that organizations typically, in order to get the transformation right and make it happen, for every dollar you spend on technology, you need to spend like $5 on capability building and change management. Yet we're not always seeing that happen, right? An organization may say, upwards of 80% of executives say, I know I need a massive upskilling effort for my, organization. And by the way, when I think about upskilling, it's like upskilling and adoption. To Jamie's point, it's not just about like, teach me how to use ChatGPT, right? It's help me redefine my workflows. Yet in organizations, you see less than 20% of those organizations actually creating these large, upskilling types of programs. And so I would say, that's the sort of context that we are operating in right now. And, at least for me within McKinsey, we are seeing a massive investment in change management and upskilling associated with our own journey around AI transformation, and really even getting into changing the rituals of the way we work and what the actual work looks like itself, which again is required versus I'm just going to upskill you on a bunch of tools that's not going to help those managers' anxiety. And oh, by the way, I think we'll get into it later. The operating model isn't going to be stable anytime soon. So,
Mhm.
how do we
Right.
support our leaders in a world where that operating model isn't going to be stable?
Yeah, yeah, no question. That number that you gave is pretty remarkable, and I'm going to guess many organizations are nowhere close to that. Spend $1 on tech,
Mhm.
$5 on human capability and development. Uh, Adam, does it look anything like that at DoorDash, or can you share how you think about that combination because it's a really stark number.
The combination just around like the change management and transformation.
Well, yeah, and the importance of spending on, on the human capacity and development right now too. I mean, so many organizations are just pouring money into the technology capabilities that they have, but you've got to keep up with that on the human side too.
Yeah, I think it's an important challenge. I think, Jamie, everything you mentioned certainly resonates. I think, there's certainly a lot of work we have to do. I think the anxiety is high. I think from a talent development perspective, we are thinking about how do you relieve the anxiety by I think getting some of the foundational stuff kind of out there to folks. And so, there's the angst around like, what do I need to know how to use? What are the tools available? How do I know when to use them for what? And I think sometimes not having any of that even there creates anxiety for managers around like, I don't even know where to go for things. Like, I don't know what's available. I don't know how to even use some of these basic things, which I know sounds maybe somewhat basic, but I think having that at least gives folks the sense of like, okay, I know what's available, where to go for it, how to get it. And sometimes that's even difficult. And then I think we're thinking about how are we as a talent development team building some of its tools into these workflows of how managers work, particularly around some of the things that we know are typically really difficult for managers to do, whether that's like preparing for one-on-ones or having these difficult conversations, or we just got all of our engagement results and we're thinking about how do we action on those, or how do I look at everything that I just got and get some really quick insights on what to do with it. And so how can we start building some of the tools that deliver, and I think we might get to some of this too, within the flow of work, some of those insights. So as I get my all my results through on how my team's performing from engagement perspective, what are the three things I should be focusing on now? And how do I get those so I don't have to scour for them? And so if we can take away some of those things that I think sit in someone's mind around what should I be doing and how should I be using it and giving it to them at the right time, which I think is a really important shift we see in leadership development, not pulling you out for these
Yep.
large programs, but being more intentional about giving to you in the flow of work, helps to at least take out one thing that someone's thinking about of like, how should I be thinking about this? Because I think, Jamie, your point, like judgment is key. There's so many possibilities now. Like, how do we take out one less thing now that you have to be thinking about in terms of like how you're optimizing how your team operates?
Judgment comes up over and over again. I think I hear that word more often right now in the conversations that I'm having with leaders is the importance of judgment. Heather, we talked in our prep call. I thought it was interesting, kind of how McKinsey is thinking about this from the very beginning. Not specifically judgment, but human skills and how do we change the approach to hiring. You joined us for our Leading with AI Summit back in February, and you talked about how much people spend trying to learn how to interview at McKinsey and what I mean, a whole industry that's been built around this, right? But also how you're changing your hiring process and adding in some gamification processes to try to identify some of these human skills early on because there's so much conversation about them. And I think it's harder when you actually start thinking about how do we identify them and how do we develop them. So I'd love to get you to jump in and share a little bit about how you're thinking about identifying skills like problem solving, other human skills at the very front end when you're hiring.
Yeah. So I guess a couple different things. So one is on sort of we call them a little harder skills, things like problem solving. What we have traditionally done is sort of an oral case to really understand sort of your thinking and what you're doing. And we started to pilot actually the use of AI. Because that's how people are going to be expected to solve problems at McKinsey, right? Using AI and then coming up with what is better than AI. What can you push beyond, right? And in that course of that sort of interview, we are understanding kind of conceptual thinking, their creativity. We're also able to see their judgment, like what do they do with an output of AI, right? So really thinking about how do we change how we think about problem solving with that in mind and how we assess problem solving. And that's sort of like taking skills we've already cared about and sort of refining them a little bit and how we think about assessing them and techniques. On the other side of the house, on sort of more of what we call more of our behavioral types of skills, we've done a couple things. So one is we've started to look for sort of newer skills, right? And one of those skills is learning agility. Like how fast can you learn? And have you taken examples of where you've learned something, you've failed, and you've taken some risks? We also look for kind of how well you overcome obstacles because we do believe that in this new world, this notion of, having obstacles that you have to overcome and or how fast you can learn are going to be super critical. So we have embedded those in our interviewing processes and we look for candidates, in their resumes who have demonstrated those skills. Maybe they changed a major 3 times at school and, had to learn all new content, or they've jumped into different topics of, their internships to pull things out. And then we're also looking at new ways to actually assess those skills. And so, again, in our problem solving world, we have a resolve game, which is actually it's a game that you play, a video game that you play for us to understand your problem solving skills. And we're currently building a game on the behavioral side, which will again allow us to understand sort of how folks demonstrate those behavioral skills in a way that one is more accessible to people because we can do it on a much bigger scale. And two, allows for an environment where you can't be so prepped, if that's the way to best describe
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, I think that the combination of how you identify that in the questions, but also like some real hands-on assessments is an interesting idea there. Jamie, we talked before about this concept of AI fluency. We're hearing a lot about hard skills, as Heather just called them, or human skills. Some people call them soft, durable, whatever. But there's also this whole discussion happening right now about AI fluency. Um, but there's not a lot of clarity, I think, around the term. And I'd love to just get you to talk about how you define it. What is it that what's the definition of how you're thinking of that term?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of it does map to what Heather was just describing in interview processes of what people are looking for in role. We think about it sort of at two different levels now, and this is for anyone, not just an IC, not just a manager, um, because every IC is a leader now. Every leader needs to operate as an IC. So kind of think about it at two different levels. One might be the IC level now, which is really about not just can you use the tool, but can you build with it?
Right, for
The work
individual contributors, right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Sorry. The individual contributor role. Every manager is also an individual contributor and needs to do their own work, but also there's a need to lead from the front and help your team sort of show them the way around having a builder mindset. So, and that's where it kind of gets into that leadership component of do you have that builder mindset? Heather described it as risk taking, which I like. One of the things that we look for at Mento is a sort of fearlessness. Are you willing to just go after the unknown that is AI and just throw yourself at it? Because that's really how you learn best in many ways. We're all trying to figure that out. As a leader, that means being open to experimentation, iteration, being willing to keep going, continuous, all of those aspects of it. And can you create that environment not just for yourself, but of course for your team? That is really critical. Um, like Adam was saying, you can find the tools, but you also need to nurture an environment where people feel like they can experiment, where they can be fearless. And that's going to happen not just at like a large cultural level, but really on a team level as well. And then the other aspect around AI fluency now is continuous learning. There is no, I'd like to think there is a peak of AI.
We
Like you
all
come,
would, Jamie. We all.
yeah,
Will
like
we ever get
I don't
there?
know where the mountaintop is. I simply haven't seen it. I don't know
Yeah.
if we will. So how do you get comfortable with this idea that like you'll never be, fully fluent in the same way, but how do you create an environment for yourself and again for your team and for the other sort of different people that you work with around continuous learning? And creating continuous learning cultures where you're sharing best practices. It's not going to look as much like formal learning. Let's go sit in a course, but like where's your team sharing ideas? How are they helping each other? How is that helping each other cross-functionally? Again, I really feel very strongly that lines are blurring in roles, but then how do we all work together to bring each other along? And in this world, it's not just the responsibility as a leader, but also as a colleague and a team member to help ensure everyone's brought along and you're sharing best practices and you're helping each other. One, it's build it, that helps dig into the actually and like
Yeah.
extract the humanity of this. It's helping each other. We all feel better when we're helping each other and learning from each other and sharing what we've learned. But it's also really important as a leader to create that environment and help people along the journey. So you don't just have one group that's very AI near fluency and one group that's on the
Right.
other end of the spectrum, right? Like that's not what's going to make companies or teams better. And then, of course, it's again just that judgment piece. What
Uh-huh.
problems are worth solving? Which outputs are good enough to trust? And where to focus your time and attention. That is huge. Prioritization keeps coming up, and being really good at prioritization and focus is a skill. And connecting that back to the business. One of the things that our VP of engineering always says is that, every engineer now needs to be a business leader. Every business leader needs to be an engineer,
Mhm.
right? So this mindset, like
Yeah.
really connecting that to what we're doing and where we're going and what can impact the business are going to be new sides of the fluency beyond the technical skills.
Jamie, you brought up a couple times, and just now when you were talking about every engineer needs to be a business leader, this idea of blurred lines across And again, that's something we keep hearing about over and over again.
Yes.
I'd love to throw this out to both Heather and Adam. Are there ways in which you're trying to develop skills that cross those paths more? Someone who maybe is coming up in the HR function to like make sure that they're developing the skills they need to blur those lines with IT or with other organizations. Maybe talk a little bit about what you're doing to help develop that, Heather, and then I'll turn to you, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting you ask me that question because the book that's sitting right next to me on my desk is the new book that we just sort of published, which is called Rewired.
Wow.
And I have literally like I've got sticky notes and whatever, all throughout the book
Yeah.
because I'm learning about what a data product is because I need to understand what a data product is to effectively move my organization, my L&D organization to a new level with more agentic learning.
Mm.
And what we're suggesting to business leaders at McKinsey, and I'm certainly taking my own medicine, is 8 to 10 hours a week and really understanding the technology. And then if you look at how my learning organization is actually shifting, I personally now am spending half of my week, if I look at my calendar, with technical colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's happening throughout my learning organization as we're pivoting to be much more integrated into our technology organizations, as we're thinking about building products together that not just improve productivity, but do development in the flow of work. And so I would say, as McKinsey overall and the advice we're giving our clients, we believe strongly in that this notion of business leaders need to be technologists and technologists need to lead into business. And that's certainly kind of how at least we're seeing it happen within our, HR function inside of McKinsey as well. And it's a big shift. And I know what a data mesh
Yeah.
is now.
I love that, Heather. The
Can
data
tell us.
mesh.
The data mesh. So you said 8 to 10 hours a week. Is that 8 to 10 hours a week learning about?
Just in the sort of like, on phone calls with technologists,
Yep,
spending
yep,
time reading, going through
yep.
LinkedIn posts, following, what other people follow, like you name it. I mean, some of it is formal learning, but a
Mhm.
lot of it is just sort of operating kind of in a new way of working that, to
Uh-huh.
Jamie's point, is more collaborative and more integrated with a technology and the technology organization, and knowing enough as a business leader to ask the right questions, right? So a question I asked our technology folks yesterday is, when are we turning kind of our different HR systems into data products? Like when are we moving from a, you know, database to these data products? And so under what conditions would I want to move my like learning data into this data product? And the answer is, well, when you have enough agentic use cases to do that, but I have to know enough to ask the question and know that's the direction of travel to really be able to then lean in as a business leader in a very different way.
It's interesting because I feel like we've been talking about the need to keep people out of their silos and to work collaboratively and cross-functionally for a long time. And
Mm.
this is really forcing people's hands in a way that it hasn't before. Adam, what does that look like at DoorDash? Are there ways that you're really trying to develop and bring people along, between functions?
Yeah, I think boy, that's 8 to 10 hours, Heather. I got to step it up, I feel like.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
know, right?
I
I'm
think
like,
that's
I
one of
think I
the
got two.
it's one of the big challenges though, is like that carving out space too, I think that we try to find. And how do you socialize that? How do you make it okay? How do we capture that in a way that people feel like it's important to be investing that. And I think when you look at the outcomes and you invest in the outcomes and the incentives, which you might talk about, you start to see that. So as people invest that time and they see that rewarded in ways, and not just monetarily, but in other ways, that plays out. To your point, or Jenna, you asked about the cross-functional part. I think I certainly resonate. Like we as a HR people team are thinking more product minded. I think the same thing. Like we're spending more times thinking about how we think about what we offer from a product perspective and coming in that way and thinking about how we can segment then what we offer more effectively. And AI certainly allows that personalization where we start to see about how do we give people what they need in the flow of work. Cross-functionally, though, I think early days there was a lot of opportunities to kind of have these champions that were kind of socializing the ways to use AI, and I think we used it and we leaned on that early, and that was really effective, especially as everyone was trying to get a sense of how to use it. Where I think we really see a lot of movement now, more so is one, certainly empowering leaders to kind of drive this change. Of course, that's really important given how kind of transformational it is, but also encouraging a lot of that sharing even within functions. And so I've actually seen a lot of that really propagate within a particular function because now as an engineer thinks about how they're using AI, there's probably not as many connection points to maybe how I might use it. But certainly when we think about incubating that within the people team and just encouraging more of like, okay, well, how does someone on our talent and reward cycle think about using AI as an input to our promotion process, where maybe we have tools that are allowing folks to create promotion docs that are more equitable and more
Yep.
standardized. I can see how I can then apply that to where I am. And so I think we're starting to see a lot more of the incubation more in like the functional areas and ensuring that leaders are propagating that and that we can now see visibly where those pockets exist. I think that's an evolution now too. So quarterly,
Uh-huh.
we are tracking how AI is being utilized and where we see it being utilized more effectively. It's helpful to know where the gaps are, but it's helpful to know where the strengths are so that we can help start connecting those dots and connecting those leaders throughout the organization.
You know, talking about connections, talking about cross-functional, one of the things that we talked about, in preparation for this is the importance of distributing learning. I think it was either Heather or Adam who said, we can't do this all ourselves as learning, officers, as people leading learning and development. We really have to rely on either AI champions or I think at McKinsey, Heather, you call them black belts. If you're talking to somebody about introducing more of a distribution strategy for how do you teach learning and how do you spread learning about AI throughout the organization, what have been some of the key, takeaways or learnings that you've had from how to make that work effectively?
Well, I think this kind of goes also back to Jamie's point around you just can't keep up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we found really effective is, as Adam and a similar type of model, which we, call them AI fellows or AI black belts, where we're actually training a set of people, high performers. So it's actually, kind of we recognize them by doing kind of deep training with them, build sort of a network of the people that are going to be on the cutting edge, and then send them out into the organization. Because again, people learn the best from peers in the flow of work, right? And that's what's happening in these situations is they are teaching in the flow of work. And part of us upskilling you is that you then are responsible for then teaching your team, keeping them current, etc. And so we found that a very, very effective model for two reasons. One, because it's peer based. Two, because it's allowing us to sort of keep it kind of current because that peer group kind of gets together on a regular basis and says what's new that they then distribute. And people are learning as they're actually doing the work itself, which is always better than going off to some learning program to sort of learn the work.
Yeah.
So we have found those types of champion programs, AI fellows, black belts, whatever you want to call them, a great way to effectively scale learning across the organization without the burden falling on the learning organization to be the one delivering all of the content.
And Jamie, Mento really does a lot of coaching and mentoring right in that flow of work as we're describing here. I know that's, one of the biggest themes we keep hearing about with AI
Mhm.
and learning is how important it is from shifting from those episodic pull you out, take you to the classroom moments and actually
Mhm.
putting it into the flow of work. Give me an example or two of what that looks like, that you've seen where it works really well.
In terms of what organizations are doing.
Yes, exactly. For putting it into that flow of work, the coaching, in that moment where someone really needs it.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's really interesting because there has been a lot of experimentation over the past, call it, 12 months, maybe a little bit longer, about what learning and development in the flow actually looks like. A lot of different tools have emerged, a lot of different ideas about what works, but also as foundational models keep developing and growing faster, also, what makes sense because you don't want tool spread, and that's also a challenge that organizations are facing now, where everyone was trying a bunch of things and now they're trying to create some convergence again. In terms of what we're seeing at Mento, I can speak from our experience, which is that um, what we realized is that Coaching was the most sort of continuous that there was in the pre-AI days because you meet with your coach every other week, at least at Mento, right? So that is relatively frequent compared to a workshop or a training or an
Yep.
LMS or some other system. But that's not enough in modern work. 2 weeks, I'm sure all of you can agree here. It feels like a lifetime. Like I don't even remember what happened on Friday, and it's now Tuesday. And my one-on-ones, I'm like, what happened last week? What were we working on? Okay, I simply can't remember.
There will be a whole new capability for AI 2 weeks from now.
Exactly. Like
Yes.
we've got a whole new thing going on. There, Claude design was dropped. Now we got to change this thing.
Yep.
Okay. Right. So there's constant change. And with that, what we realized is that, the beauty of coaching, especially a coaching model like ours, is that it's this blend of coaching and mentorship. So you're really working on the immediate challenge that you
Hmm.
might be facing and trying to develop these new leadership skills. But you can have a breakthrough in a session, you can build that amazing framework, you can prep for that conversation, you can develop, the framework for the product prioritization so that your team can go build new AI workflows. But then, you leave the session and you forget. So instead of focusing on maybe more of a traditional AI coaching that sits with you at work, we instead focused on what we do the best, which is capture what's happening in a session. All of that, your realizations, the leadership, what you're developing in coaching are these leadership playbooks. And so how do you take that with you so you can actually apply it in the flow of work in those difficult leadership moments? So that is what we've built at Mento, and we've seen huge uptick in adoption very quickly because people do go back to their coaching guidance in that moment. And how do we
Yeah.
deliver that to them when they need it right before they have that conversation? How do we plug into the tools that Adam is talking about where they're already saying, "Hey, help me, prep for this one-on-one," and then their coach's guidance is there. "Hey, you said you were
Yeah.
going to
They kind
talk
of
to
a
your
resource they
report."
can turn
Exactly.
back
You said you
to.
were going to talk to your report about this conversation. This was the exact sort of playbook or conversation script or approach that you and your coach talked about. Here it is right there, right when you need it. And so this is really about, kind of changing how, leaders lead by delivering them the right expertise in the right moment, not needing to go someplace else. But that's also how you accelerate behavior change. And I think one of the things that's very exciting about AI and what we're seeing is that there are ways to do this that are really effective. And so it's not these sort of distinct parts where I'm learning this thing over here, then I have to try to incorporate it, remember it, apply it. That's a really slow learning loop. And there's a reason why behavior change does take so long. Now you can change how you engage with a report in a matter of days. And I think that will be the expectation moving forward. The pace of
Yep.
technology is moving quickly. The learning rate is the goal. That will be
Right.
the same in how you manage your teams. So I think it's very exciting.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. Heather, there's a question in the chat. I don't want to get too far from the discussion about the black belts and the champions that I thought was interesting, which is how are you constructing the network of those AI black belts? Is it more distributing the knowledge from a grassroots basis, or is it really structured? How are you building that network of champions?
Yeah, so it starts with kind of the teams, the functions or the, groups on the ground identifying who those high performers are. And we're intentional about really trying to make sure they're distributed across the organization so they'll have kind of effect in different ways. So you might pick a certain number of people from different geographies and or from different practices in which they operate. We then bring them together, and we believe it's important. We bring them together to say, like, we are investing in you, and our expectation based on the investment into you is that you will do things kind of coming out after. And so we invest in them, we bring them together to, and then the other thing that does is by investing in them and bringing them together, they then build relationships with the other people that are a part of that, right? So then when they go back out into their kind of organizations, they have some basis to then actually want to connect with this group of people again. Because again, I can teach them something, but then 6 months later, like what I taught them is probably irrelevant. And are they kind of keeping up with the pace of change? We also give them access to what we call like true subject matter experts so that they have like a hotline to like the really, really, like double black belts, right? And so we give them access to hotline. We also give them access to tools sooner than anybody else gets access to tools. And they do get some sort of, ongoing upskilling. But then they go out in their organizations and then share with teams. And we're also tracking sort of, what happens with when one of these folks is on the team, to Adam's point, what is the proficiency level move for the teams that they work with? Like, what does that happen? What is the impact they're actually having on clients? Does the impact change? Does the way they're working change? Because we also keep track of like how people are working and different behaviors that we expect. And so to sort of understand what the impact from that group is. And, it's been, again, a very positive way to drive change.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, the point you made about making sure you invest in them and bring them together and build those relationships first so they can come back to each other and have that network on top of what they're trying to build and distribute through the organization. Adam, do you want to talk at all about how you're sharing knowledge through DoorDash? Do you have a similar AI champion program or something like that helps drive this across the organization?
It's much more decentralized. What I like, Heather, about what you do is the connection as the group. So they feel like they're a cohort and there's some connectivity there and learnings. And I think that's really important as I think about what we could do. I think we have these folks, but they come more organically. And I think there's an opportunity to more formally reward and recognize those individuals too. Because I think what happens to you when you're an early adopter and you're ahead of the game is you bear the burden of having to teach everybody else. And that's not often always fair or equitable. So having that is really helpful. I was going to say, I think for us, which is interesting and maybe unique too, and it speaks to what Heather mentioned and Jamie, both around like the hiring, like curiosity and learning, and then also experimentation is those things are very much born into kind of our culture. And we very much look for individuals that kind of come into the organization that way. And we assess Heather in a similar way of people who come in who have that natural curiosity to learn. We very much pride ourselves on experimentation. And I think culturally that helps new transformations like this spread really quickly. We also have a culture where people are very much about sharing information. So there's not a hoarding of information or a feeling of it keeping this gives me ahead of somebody else, but a sense of sharing this allows us all to kind of rise. And I think it's important to think about if folks who are wondering like, how do I get greater adoption? Is the best training or champions sometimes can't operate even within a system that feels constrained because you don't have those things as a culture that kind of encourage those behaviors. And so also thinking about like, how are you being mindful of those things within the organization? And those are hard to shift, of course, like those don't change overnight, but like having those in place too, or looking for those barriers and how you're moving those, because the best programs, I think, in all these other things can also still be a struggle if culturally those behaviors are not rewarded or not recognized, or generally people feel like those do not help them grow within the organization as well. So Jen, I don't know if
So
I got
you
your question exactly, but
No,
that
no,
kind of stands out to me.
it's
Yeah.
great because I think it's really interesting to hear that in some cases it's a little more organic and in others it's very structured and more built out as an official or formal approach. But one of the things you were talking about, Adam, brings me to, you talk about how are we rewarding people or how are we recognizing people and incentives for whether it's AI adoption or teaching AI skills to others, I think is an interesting challenge for leaders right now because we're used to using incentives to drive behavior, but also they can send the wrong signals and they can get people to use AI just for AI's sake. So I'm curious we're hearing more and more conversations about how use AI use is being pulled into performance management
Hmm.
and topics like that. So I'm curious to hear how all of you are either hearing or seeing the thinking behind incentives with AI adoption and use and how that translates into changing leadership behaviors. Heather, how does that play into how McKinsey thinks about incentives
Yeah.
and
Well,
AI?
this up to this point in time, we've actually been pretty explicit about not just making AI use be
Mhm.
something that we measure for. Our
And why?
evaluations.
Like talk a little bit about the downside of doing that. Yeah.
Well, again, so our evaluations are holistic. And what we really care about is how effective your problem solving is. And are you pushing the boundaries of your problem solving with clients? And are you applying good judgment to what you come up with? And is it impact oriented, fact-based, all of those things, right? How are you communicating and how are you innovating on teams, right? So we talk a lot about innovation and what your innovation on your team looks like. Now, what we've done is we've actually taken a look at our leadership skills and we've actually said, how would we adapt these leadership skills given an AI world? So you'll see more emphasis on things like judgment. You'll see more emphasis in our team leaders around, are you creating time for your teams to experiment, to do new things, right? And thinking about, your innovation, we're thinking about kind of leaning more into sort of how you're innovating and scaling and doing new pieces of work. Now, all of that is enabled by AI, right? And
Mhm.
so but we are not saying you use AI well, so like you use AI a lot, so I'm going to rate you well, right? It is how do you integrate it into some of the things that we're driving impact around to then say, okay, that's what I care about is that you're delivering even more impact to our clients, that you're doing an even better job developing your teams, that you're driving more innovation for the firm, right? That's what I really care about. And yes, AI is going to be part of it. Now, I can't say that that's going to be where we land always, but that's certainly a part of it. I will say from a developmental perspective, we are talking more about giving people at least visibility into here's how much you're using the tools, you know, you know, those kinds of things. And then I would say the
Right,
one other
right.
place that we're using it, and again, this is much more developmentally, is around credentialing. So we actually know what level of skill you have on certain things to be able to staff you into teams, right? So,
Mm.
how deep can you build AI tools is really important to know. And so we've credentialing you to staff you on teams. Do you understand how to advise a client on AI topics? Because I need to know that to be able to match you effectively to talent. So again, but you could say it's evaluative in the sense the more you know, the more likely you are to get pulled into things, the more project opportunities you have, but
But not on its own
it's
right.
not on its own right.
That's really interesting. So it's a real focus on the leadership behaviors that are important rather than just the usage itself. Jamie, I'm curious to touch base with you quickly on what you're hearing from clients on this, and then I'd love to dig into some more of the questions in the chat,
Yeah,
but
so this
specifically
is
around incentives. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question because what we're seeing, and this does relate to incentives and is really around performance. So when people and retention, so there's two things. And what we see again in April, what we saw in our latest sort of survey of people coming into coaching, people said we saw a decline in I'm performing at my best. It's one of the questions. It was 6.9 out of 10, which is
Mm.
pretty low considering the kinds of folks that are being invested in for coaching. And then my future looks promising with the company is also at a 6.9 out of 10. So
Mm.
people are coming in feeling like they're performing worse and they are also feeling like it's creating a bit of a retention issue. So that's like kind of how the performance and incentive issues kind of coming out. It's like it's been like this large productivity conversation, but really what's inside of it is performance and retention problem that companies are starting
Well, and that same anxiety, I think, that you addressed at the beginning too,
yeah, the
right? People are
anxiety,
feeling
the overwhelm, being an IC who needs to build and also a leader that's think about all the things that we just talked about. You need to create the conditions for your team. You need to set continuous goals. You need to lead in motion. Like it's a lot of work for that. That's a huge surface area. You need to collaborate differently. Getting work done is different. Like they're traditional leadership skills, but how you actually are an effective leader in the AI environment is completely new. So a lot of also what we typically see in these moments is that managers take up more on themselves. One of their big challenges is setting clear goals now
Mhm.
in a world where goals are
Mhm.
constantly shifting.
Yeah.
People don't work on multi-month roadmaps anymore. You basically can maybe do a quarter, but that's probably going to change as well. And effective delegation. How do you bring your team along while also producing the results that you need in a world where speed is very important. How do you figure out what's valuable and what the team, how do you hone your judgment and help the team? So it's like we're managers right now are really kind of caught in this very interesting and challenging world. So it's not a huge surprise right? That we're seeing some of these numbers drop around performance, sustainability, sustaining your performance, retention. Um, and where that relates to incentives and rewards, and again, we obviously have a certain view. In what we see is that people are investing, more companies are now saying it's actually important to invest in the human conditions that enable people to lead and drive this change.
Right,
So that's
right.
again, it's like how, and that's partially where coaching comes in. Obviously, we have a specific
The
lens because those are
behaviors
our
and the
partners,
skills and not just the
but they're not just saying, hey, we're just going to invest only in your AI skills. Heather just defined all these leadership skills that are newly important in this world. Now,
right.
giving people the support to actually build those leadership skills is also now how companies are thinking about how do you reward and incentivize and support these change makers and these folks in an organization to bring everyone along, to bring their teams along. There's the ripple effect, right, with
Yep,
managers. If you
yep,
help them, you can
yes,
also help their teams. So
agree.
that's one of the big things that we're actually seeing shift, which might seem a little bit counterintuitive in this day and age.
I'd love to jump in with our last 15 minutes here with some there's some great questions in the Q&A. One that I was going to wrap up our conversation with, but I'm gonna jump in now so we have plenty of time to do it. And I'm you're gonna get the easy version, Adam, because you get to go first. If you could bet on one or two management skills that will become disproportionately valuable in the next 2 to 3 years because of AI, what are they?
I mean, we've talked about it, which I think is judgment, but I think it's like decision making. It's where we focus. It's like
Decision
how are you thinking about making the correct decisions with so much information at your disposal, almost like endless and inputs that you have to manage. And so we focus a lot on that of like how are we helping our leaders now think about the right ways to make decisions, to understand when enough data is enough, like when do you have enough and what's the threshold in order to go ahead and make a decision and be comfortable then that that decision is going to lead to a favorable outcome. Of course, if it doesn't, we understand that's part of the process. And then thinking about the escalation of that too is one thing that we're really critical about of like, okay, at what point when you feel like you've kind of reached this point of paralysis, like when can you escalate? And I think also there's always a sense as leaders that escalation might be some form of failure. And that's certainly not the case. There are points of which there are tensions that exist between cross-functional partners on decisions that are just quite complex and we don't know how to do it. So I think helping them understand how to make those, when to escalate, so that we can ultimately move more quickly. I think that's one of the ones that's top of mind, and always has been. I think it's just kind of changing now
Yeah.
as there's more information available.
Okay, Heather, you get to go next, but you can't say decision making.
I won't say decision making. I would say the
Mm.
two that we're really thinking about, one is on these relationship building skills, right? So how effectively can you build relationships, build intimacy, trust, is a big one. And what that looks like. So relationship building skills, I think, are going to become even more important. And those go, from building relationships with your customers or your clients to building relationships with your teams. Those are going to be incredibly important. Another one that we've talked a little bit about already too is this notion of, let's call it resilience or learning agility or curiosity, all of those things to sort of really think about how that what that looks like. We talk a lot about in McKinsey, and we've started leaning into more sort of leading from like like leading yourself, then leading others, then leading leaders, and this notion of starting with the leading of the self is going to be just increasingly important in this world where the operating model is always changing, new technologies are coming, but can you get yourself to be kind of more reliant and self-assured? And that will then allow you to then lead others, lead teams, etc. So those would be the two that I would focus on.
All right. Jamie, you got a
Oh
couple there.
gosh, why do you make me go last? That was
Sorry, you gotta go
fantastic.
last.
I know I couldn't, big plus one. And I would maybe say like the top line of that for me, because those are the skills underneath it, is that you're not leading execution anymore. You're not like, here's the
Okay.
super defined project, and like now we just need to go execute it, and like here's the project tracker, and like okay, that's like directing an execution and executors, and that's really what you're kind of helping your team do as a
Right,
leader.
right.
Now you're leading builders, and the skills that Adam and Heather just talked about are very much within that. You need to build relationships in order to get work done. and prioritize and find focus and work across functions to make sure you have the right data and the inputs. It's the judgment component. How do you direct people? How do you understand the business that's always changing? How do you direct people's work toward it? It's not mistaking activity for value. And it's not just setting direction, it's creating the settings and the conditions where people can build and innovate and learn and be resilient. And that's I don't know if we know exactly, the most important skill within that. I think it's going to be a body of work, but it's also like a mindset and approach to leadership that is rapidly changing, and we're within that transition. So fun
I
time
like
to
that
be a
idea of,
leader in 2026.
yeah, I like that idea of the shift from leading execution to leading builders. I can't tell you how often we're hearing that term of builders being built into job descriptions or
I
to,
know.
the
Hmm.
way people are describing roles today.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. There's another question in the chat about AI slop, and they specifically are asking about how do you know if employees are creating AI slop? But I'm also curious from like a learning and development point, like how do you help people identify it, know how to handle it when they're finding that it's just producing more work. How are you thinking about it, correcting for that in like a leadership development place? Maybe Heather, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, so we're really trying to again teach the skills of judgment, et cetera,
Yeah.
kind of in the context of how we teach. So, for example, McKinsey has a really robust problem-solving process. It's a seven-step problem-solving process. One of the steps is building an issue tree, right? So, in
Mhm.
a learning program, we'll teach you to build the issue tree on your own. Then we'll have you build the issue tree with AI. And then we'll talk about what's the judgment, the human layer that needs to be applied on top of the issue tree in order to then get it to a level where A, it's providing more insight to a client than just AI would be, and two, it's making sure it's not, AI slop. So, I mean, again, this is, kind of the way that we're trying to teach. Now, do people still take shortcuts? For sure. I would say one of the other things we're really thinking about doing is how can we build more into the actual tools themselves to teach, right? And so, rather than like you being able to just, again, because we have it's a tool called Inception that will actually build you the issue trees, rather than Inception just allowing you to stop there, actually forcing you to ask a set of questions to really force your thinking about what could some pressure tests that you would be. So we're sort of trying to build that also into the tools themselves that would then prevent somebody just from pressing a bunch of buttons and just sending it off to someone else in the organization who then has to do all the work to like figure out that the sources weren't checked and, et cetera, et cetera.
So building it into the systems. Adam, do you have anything to add to that on just like managing the AI slop overload and how leaders can learn to deal with that?
No, it's a good. I haven't actually thought. I haven't heard that question. I don't see a lot of it, fortunately. Well, when I think about
Lucky.
this, though, yeah. Well, I'm sure it's out there. I know it is, right? I try to think about the underlying issues behind like why people are creating it, and I think I think of a couple. Like I know for some instances where it does pop up, it's a level of like I'm so busy and I'm trying to use this so much that I'm just pushing it out, right? Right. And
Mhm.
there's another which is I don't have enough discerning either subject matter expertise or understanding to know that it is slop. And I think there's a little bit of like figuring out like what's the root of that issue. And so for us, I think, we probably see more of the obviously the latter on I don't have enough discerning information of those who are more newer in roles. And I think this is a struggle where those of us that have the fortunes of being in this work a little bit longer have a more discerning eye when it comes to creating and editing content that's AI generated, whereas those who are lower level. So I think for us now, as that's coming up, I'm like, wow, what should we be doing? Like helping individuals with that, particularly at some of those lower levels where I imagine it exists in that sense is one thing. And then on the other of just like I have so much work, I think it's just trying to create better boundaries and expectations around like what people are expected to produce too. And I think sometimes it feels almost limitless with AI of like I can create so many things, but going back to, of course, quantity isn't better than quality. But yeah, I think there's work to be done there, honestly. I gotta maybe put a little bit more attention around that.
Look for the AI slop. So we're closing out on time, and I just wanted to finish with asking each of you just to just to think about, if you were speaking to somebody who's a little earlier in their AI journey than your organizations are, trying to move from, experimentation to real leadership, when it comes to developing, the kind of leader we're going to need to manage this process, what's the biggest piece of advice you would have? Jamie, I'm going to start with you. Are you there?
Yeah, great question. You caught me. You caught me flat-footed on that one. No, so, I think it's, I think it's don't lose sight of the human skills that are needed. So much of what we've talked about here, peer learning, people learning best from others, people wanting to have a cohort, people wanting to have a coach to talk to about this, people needing space to experiment, connect with peers, like relationships. There's so much humanity and so much that's going to come down to the people. And I think that's obviously this is the purpose of this panel is to bring this into the forefront. I think we say it, but not a lot of companies are actually acting on that. And I think that's one of the challenges that I hear from our partners and customers in this space is that as HR, you're responsible for waving the flag and saying people skills still matter too and influencing that across the organization. And people say, yeah, 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 for sure, for sure. But then again, get to Heather's initial point of where are the dollars going? And so I think that is going to be a critical challenge for HR leaders of making sure that we invest more in the people and human skills that are going to um, enable this transformation and make sure that when leaders, like I think the definitive opportunity is when we start to think of AI skills and people development, leadership development as the same thing and not separate buckets. That is when we'll start to see people investing in these two more equally. And I think that's when, honestly, we'll end up seeing some change there. People are not saying, managers aren't saying, I'm overwhelmed, I'm not performing
Right.
well, this isn't sustainable, all of the things that I'm anxious, all the things that we're seeing now.
Yeah. Adam, any parting words on what you think is extremely important when it comes to, you know, the leadership development piece of this AI transformation we're all grappling with?
I think I would say, one of the things that we I think pride ourselves on is like operating at the lowest level of detail was a big mantra value of like how do you get into the weeds? And that's something
Yep.
that's applicable to anybody. So it's whether you're an individual contributor or you're a VP. And I think it's asking the same of leaders to do that too, particularly when it comes to kind of what we're going through with AI, because everyone's new here. Like there is very few experts, but often I think as leaders, there's a sense of, well, I don't need to be in those weeds. Like my team will do that. And I think what we do have to do is expect and ask of our leaders to kind of be in the weeds at the same level too, to come along the journey and to learn at the same way that they do and to help them grow in the same way as well. And I think that can be difficult and it's hard for leaders. As Jamie mentioned, there's so many things we expect of them. So I think that's an important piece. And certainly we have a responsibility of like creating the space and providing the right, I think, system and culture around that help facilitate that. And that's not easy, but I think that's an important piece that we could do to support leaders during the change.
Yeah, I think that's a good point we haven't discussed yet. Heather, I was thinking when Jamie was talking about bringing AI skills and human skills together and how much McKinsey focuses on making sure those two things happen together. But I'd love for you to have the last word on what is your biggest piece of advice for thinking about the leadership development piece of these AI transformations?
I would just say, like, get buddy buddy with your technical leadership team that's driving a lot of the transformation, right? For a couple of different reasons, right? One of which is that, again, so you can think about as you're, you know, investing the right amount in the people as you're investing in the tech. And if it means you got to change the priorities on the tech to invest in the people to actually really drive the impact for the organization, because that's what it's really about. Right. So that would be one thing is just really, getting tight there. And the other reason to get really tight there is because, again, they're defining the future systems of work, right? And if we can do more to partner so those future systems of work, not just support AI productivity, but actually support development themselves, right? Where they're actually supporting the development of these leadership skills. Like, again, that's a massive unlock. And so, again, I would just say find some new best friends.
And know what a data mesh is, right?
Well,
Yeah.
there's a
That'll
whole
help you
bunch of
earn them.
things. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that may help you earn the respect. So,
Well, thanks to all of you. I thought there were some great ideas today. I loved just sort of Jamie's framing at the beginning about some of the core pain points that leaders are facing: personal anxiety, responsibility, and the need for urgency, and how those are really driving a lot of how leaders are dealing with this. I really appreciate Adam's point just now about leaders making sure they really get into the weeds and are kind of living this problem and this development with the people that they work with. And Heather, just tons of great ideas about distributing learning throughout the organization, how you're structuring that, how you're building those relationships first. The real value of bringing IT and HR and all kinds of other combined groups together to make sure those are learning together and building together. So I want to thank all of you again for your time, for sharing your thoughts and your insights here. And we'll be sharing more of this information, like more of what we learned today, in the coming days on Charter. And we're looking forward to sharing the insights here. So thank you all again, and thank you to our audience, and appreciate everyone joining.